The Mystery of Willow Creek House, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Good evening, and welcome to Mystery's Team. Pour yourself something warm, draw the curtains against the rain, and settle in. Tonight we travel to a quiet corner of the English countryside, where a closed door and a cup of forgotten tea will open a wound that has been waiting since the autumn of 1934 to be seen. Some mysteries are solved in an hour. Some are solved in a lifetime. The one we are about to hear was solved in the end by a woman who had been told, until the night of her father's death, that her heart was not her own. Tonight we follow the small detective who set it free. Chapter 1. The Quiet House. The postman came up the lane at 7:20 on a Tuesday, and the wind off the brook was sharp enough to make a fellow pull his collar tighter. Behind him, beyond the pale stone gateposts of Willow Creek House, every lamp on the ground floor had already been lit. That in itself was the first wrong thing. For weeks the household had been running dark, the master refusing candles in the parlor, the lady keeping to her room, the children, if any of them could still be called children, tiptoeing past closed doors. Sir Edmund Ashworth was found an hour later. He was in his study, seated at the desk, one hand still resting on the brass handle of the top drawer. The lamp by his elbow had burned low, casting a circle of yellow light over the mahogany, over the half-written letter, over the empty porcelain cup. The clock on the mantel, a French piece the present baronet's grandmother had carried across the Channel in 1812, had stopped at Chutio of 7:20. The door had been locked from inside. For a few minutes his daughter Helena stood in the doorway without making a sound. She had taken her hand from the latch and let the door drift shut, so for those minutes she could not be certain she had truly seen it. The skin of her father's face had taken on the color of old wax. The fingers curled on the drawer had gone to marble. When at last she made a sound, it was a name, not his, someone else's. The name of a man who had been a guest in the house only 12 days before. "Dr. Thorne," she said. Then, as if she were calling someone down a long stretch of road, "Marcus." Dr. Marcus Thorne had been the Ashworth family physician for 19 years. He was a tall, careful man, with the kind of cheekbones his mother would have called distinguished, and his patients called tired. He had the additional misfortune of having once, 20 years earlier, very publicly lost a child in Vienna during a visitation summer. He never spoke of it. The loss sat behind his eyes like a stone behind water. By 8:15 he was in the study, with Helena still hovering in the hall, unable either to leave the landing or to go back into the cold room. He drew Sir Edmund's chair back, laid him flat on the rug, worked at his jaw for what felt to Helena like an hour. He pronounced him dead at 8:42, declared there must be no further disturbance until he had wired for the coroner, then stepped over to the empty teacup and lifted it carefully to his nose. He said nothing about the smell. What he did say, when Helena reached for his arm, was, "Not tonight, dear child. Not for you." By the time the first of the village men had tramped up the drive to stand in the cold parlor, the house had done something unusual. It had not flown apart, as country houses do on such nights, into weeping sisters and shouting sons. The opposite had happened. Every person inside had gone very still. Even Lady Beatrice, Edmund's second wife, who had been in the upstairs drawing room playing patience when the lamp on the writing table guttered, stood in the corridor with one glove half off, looking as though the bell for dinner had rung and she had simply forgotten her lines. "Something will have to be done about the locks," she said when nobody asked her anything. Victor, the only son, came down from the billiards room with his eyes narrowed. He had just lost what remained of the family's quarter's allowance at the autumn races in the next county, and he had not, so far, been told to his face. His mouth worked silently, as if he were rehearsing a question he did not know how to ask. Eleanor Vance, Edmund's orphaned niece, who had come to live at Willow Creek 6 months before, slipped out of the servants' doorway and stood in the corner of the hall with her hands behind her back. She was the only person in the house who did not appear to be waiting for someone to arrive. She was waiting for someone to leave. James Hartwell, the steward, kept to the cellar and counted the silver. They telephoned for Hercule Poirot at 20 minutes past 9. The local coroner, a man named Doyle, had known Poirot for 30 years and had long since stopped being surprised when the Belgian agreed to such requests. In his experience, Poirot was never in a hurry, never refused, and never arrived before 11 the following morning, unless he had a particular interest in the company he would be meeting. Tonight he arrived at 9:45, and he took the morning train. He came up the front steps of Willow Creek House in a coat so dark the butler, opening the door, took him at first for a bishop's secretary. He was carrying a small grey case. He asked only one question of the servant who received him, and it was not the one that would have occurred to any other man arriving at such a place in such weather. "Would you be so kind, mon ami, as to tell me who slept on the landing last night?" The butler looked at him for 2 full seconds, then said he would fetch Dr. Thorne. "Tell Dr. Thorne," Poirot said, "that I will see him when I have seen the room." He climbed the stairs alone. On the landing he stood for a long moment without moving, listening, the way a man listens when the wind has stopped on a lake. Then he opened the study door and walked straight away from the body, which he ignored entirely, to the mantel clock. He sat in the dead man's chair and rested 2 fingers on the stopped hands. Then he said very softly, to no one at all, "Ah, but not the wind then." That was Poirot's first sentence in the house. It would not be his last. Later, when the coroner had been and gone, and the house had the waxy smell of breath and lamp smoke, Poirot sat in the morning room with an unsweetened cup of black coffee and his notebook open on his knee. Helena had come in without knocking. She had not meant to intrude. She had only meant to collect her father's spectacles from the sideboard. But seeing the foreigner sitting there with his pencil, she had paused, and Poirot had invited her to sit in the opposite chair without raising his eyes from the page. She sat. She was wearing the same grey dress she had worn the night before. Her hands were shaking lightly in her lap. "I beg your pardon, mademoiselle," Poirot said, "but you have not slept." "I could not." "No, you would not have been able to. Not with what you have been carrying." She did not deny it. She did not confirm it. After a long moment she said, "He was going to write to Mr. Greaves in the village. The letter was half done when I phoned him. I do not know to whom it was addressed. I do not know what it was to see." Poirot made a small note on the pad. He did not look up. "You do not know," he said, "or you do not wish to say." Her breath caught. It was not a polite little catch. It was the catch of someone whose lungs are smaller than they used to be. Poirot heard it at once and, gently, closed the notebook and placed it on the side table. "You need not answer that tonight," he said, "but when you can, you will." Helena looked at him, only for a moment, with a look on her face that Poirot had seen on only 2 other occasions in 30 years of professional life. It was the look of a person who has carried something so long that she had begun to believe it was hers alone. Then she said, "He was going to send my brother away. He was going to send my brother away from the house forever." "And was he right to do so?" Helena looked down at her lap. Her hands closed so tightly that her nails made white half-moons in the skin. "I cannot see. He was my father. I loved him." Poirot inclined his head by only a fraction. He said nothing more. When she had gone, he sat alone with the cold coffee and the notebook and the wind outside, and he wrote one name on the page, not yet underlined. Victor. Chapter 2. The Locked Door. Poirot did not sleep at Willow Creek that first night. He arranged instead to be given the small blue guest chamber at the back of the house, the one that looked out through a row of beeches onto the kitchen garden. He had the lamp turned down to a single flame, and when the rest of the household had gone to their rooms, he opened his notebook and read the first 10 lines over again, twice. There had been no wind that night of Sir Edmund's death. He had established this at once. The curtains in the study at the moment of the finding had been almost still. The window, when he had opened it just now to verify the latch, had not been forced from the outside. There had been no broken pane. There had been, in other words, no intruder, and so the locked door was the wrong thing to think about first. What mattered, Poirot wrote in the notebook, was that the door was locked from inside. That meant, depending on the order in which events had occurred, that the master of the house had either died before he unlocked it, or had wanted, in his last minutes, to be alone. The first was a problem of medicine. The second was a problem of character. Poirot preferred the second kind of problem, because medicine, in his experience, lied less readily to a willing ear, but character, properly read, lied louder. He read Sir Edmund's ledger for an hour. It was kept, as the ledgers of such households always are, in the steward's office in the cellar. James Hartwell brought it up without being asked, which Poirot filed away under the heading of information that had been waited for. He set the book on the writing table and turned the pages with a gloved finger, the way one might turn the pages of a missal in a foreign church. He paid most attention to the columns of medical and pharmaceutical expenditure. The numbers were not immediately damning. They were, however, surprising. A country house of this size did not normally run its dispensary bills at the level of a small cottage hospital. Liquid preparations, he noted, were recorded against the names of patients who had not, in any other column, been unwell. One of the names recurred, his own daughter Helena. The total of expenditure on Helena's behalf was almost half the entire annual outlay. She had been, in the books, gravely unwell. Poirot closed the ledger and sat for a while, listening again, the way he had listened on the landing. In the morning, before breakfast, he asked to see Dr. Thorne alone, in the small morning room. The doctor came in his shirt sleeves, his coat folded over one arm. He looked tired. He had not written anything down since the night before. He sat on the chair Poirot indicated and declined the coffee that was offered. "I am told, doctor, that you have attended this family for 19 years. "That is correct." "And that in all that time you have not lost a patient?" "I have lost 3 small children, 2 of pneumonia, 1 in a riding accident." "And the Lady Helena?" Thorne looked at him. His eye did not waver. Poirot, who had spent his life reading such looks, thought for a long moment that here was a man who had been practicing for 19 years exactly the look he was now producing. "She is delicate," Thorne said. "She has been so from childhood." "And her specific ailment?" "A weakness of the heart, a congenital condition of the muscle. I have kept her stable for many years." Poirot turned a page of his notebook. The pencil pointed at a column of figures. "And yet, doctor, against her name we find a remarkable quantity of tinctures and preparations. Surely that is more than a small, stable heart would require." Thorne said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Often a patient in such a state requires not one remedy but several. They are used in combination. They are difficult to wean a patient from without disaster." "I see." "You do not see, monsieur. No outsider ever does. I have given her her life. Without those bottles she would have been in her grave at 20. Poirot inclined his head. "But you did not bring her to specialist opinion. You did not commission an independent review in 19 years. "No." Why not, if I may ask? Thorne stood. He was taller than Poirot by a full head, and he used the height.
He said, because I was afraid of what a stranger would tell her, because the family did not have the money to take her to London, and because, in the end, I have been a good friend to the Lady Helena. He picked up his coat and left the room. The breakfast was laid at 9, in the dining room with the long oak table. Victor came down last. He was wearing a darker tie than usual. He had not, his sister noticed, shaved. Helena sat at the foot of the table and poured the coffee Lady Beatrice had ordered, and Helena had been told to send up. Poirot sat in the chair usually reserved for the master. He had asked for it, and no one had stopped him, though Lady Beatrice had looked at the butler as though to say, "Did you hear that?" Victor reached for the toast and ate without looking at anyone. After a moment he said, addressing Poirot, "I presume you have come about my father." "That is so?" "Then may I ask whether my sister can give me the keys to his desk? I have papers of my own to collect from the study." Helena's hand on the coffee pot shook only slightly. Poirot saw it. He also saw that Lady Beatrice, opposite, raised an eyebrow at Victor with the kind of motion that has been learned by observation, but not by affection. "The study is not yet ready to be entered, monsieur," Poirot said. "The lock has been left untouched until tomorrow." "Then may I ask on what authority you are here?" Poirot looked, for the first time since he had entered the dining room, directly at Victor. He held the look a fraction too long. "On the authority, monsieur, of your sister, who telephoned for me last night. Anyone else in this house who wishes to be telephoning for someone else will, I assure you, be required to account for the timing." Victor did not answer. He put down his toast and walked out of the room. His chair scraped on the boards. Lady Beatrice, after a moment, said, "He has been impossible since the races." Poirot made no reply. When the room had emptied, Helena stood in her place and carried her father's empty cup out to the sideboard. She did not look at Poirot. She did not need to. For Poirot had just learned that Helena, not Dr. Thorne, not Victor, not the steward, not the lady, had been the one to reach for the telephone the moment her mother had come down the hallway with the news. That was not a small thing. It was not, however, the first of his surprises, for when he went back later in the morning to the morning room to write up his notes, he found beneath the saucer of his own cold coffee the visiting card of James Hartwell, and beneath that, a single pressed sprig of honeysuckle, dried flat and bound with a twist of black cotton. The card bore in pencil 3 words. It said, "For your eyes." And it said, "Thank you." Poirot turned the sprig over in his hand for a long moment. He did not like honeysuckle. He had never trusted a thing that smelled of summer when the season in which you actually smelled it was autumn. Chapter 3. The Steward's Map. James Hartwell was in the cellar when Poirot knocked. He was counting the silver, as he had been counting it the night before, and the lamp he worked by gave his face the look of a man who had been paid in old coins too long. He stood when the Belgian came down the steps and offered him the only clean chair. "I did not intend to bother you, Mr. Hartwell," Poirot said. "You are not bothering me, sir. I have been expecting you. I have worked this estate 31 years. I have been expecting someone to ask me a question for 31, and I have not yet had the asking." Poirot sat on the edge of a crate of bottled ale. He said, "Then let us lose no more time. You sent me a card this morning." "I did, sir." "And the sprig?" "From the bush beside the kitchen garden door, sir. The bush that grows where the master walked in the evenings." "Why did you send it?" Hartwell sat for a moment. He did not look like a man who had been contradicted lately. He looked like a man who had been contradicted for so long he had learned to do it inside his head.
Sir Edmund walked in the garden every evening of his life, sir, winter or summer. Last Tuesday, as is my recollection, he took his walk as usual, but he came back in by the kitchen door rather than the study door. You noticed? I have counted the gravel in this drive 30 times, sir. I notice what walks across it. And after he came in, what then? He sat in the small morning room with Dr. Thorne. Their meeting lasted 25 minutes. I heard the doctor's voice once. I did not catch the words. Then Sir Edmund went into the study alone. Dr. Thorne did not go with him. Poirot wrote on his card,
And after? The bell was not rung, the door was not opened. At 7:30, the Lady Helena came from upstairs and went along the landing. I had sent her maid to her room for the night, so I knew when she left her chamber. She stood outside the study for what seemed to me a long time. Then she came to the kitchen door and asked for me. I went with her. We opened the door and found him. You opened the door. Me and the doctor, sir. The doctor came down from the dispensary when he heard her call. Was the door locked when you came to it? Hartwell looked at him with the expression of a man who has just proved a point. It was not, sir. I did not need a key. The latch was on the move. It was exactly as I had expected. He had not locked it when he sat down. Poirot held very still. Then who locked it, Mr. Hartwell? Hartwell stood up slowly, the way a man does when the question is what he has been waiting 19 years for someone else to ask him. He went to a wooden cupboard in the corner of the cellar, took out a folded piece of brown paper and laid it on the table. It was a sketch, in charcoal, of the corridor outside the study, made by a man with the patience of an archivist. The position of every door, every picture, every shadow on the boards was laid down. There was a single penciled annotation in Hartwell's careful hand. It pointed from the drawing-room door across the landing to the study. It said, Footprint, sole of a foreign boot, direction of travel, study door. Poirot turned the sketch round to read it better. He did not speak. After a moment, Hartwell added, The footprint was not there at 6 when I last swept. It was there at 7:45 when I went up with the candle. I did not wipe it. I intended you to see it. And the gentleman who made it? I cannot say, sir. I do not know the gentleman's name. But I will tell you this. The boot was small, refined, with a slightly worn left heel. A man's boot, sir, but one belonging to a young gentleman of slender build. Not the doctor's. The doctor's are heavier. You are very observant, Mr. Hartwell. I am paid to be, sir. And what have you been paid in the years of your service? Hartwell did not flinch. He had the answer ready. He had had it ready for a long time. Not half what my sister earns as a parlour-maid in Portsmouth, sir. But that is not why I am showing you this. Then why? Because Sir Edmund was a decent man, in his fashion. He paid his bills on the second Tuesday of every month for 31 years. He never turned me off. He listened to my advice on the planting of the orchard. He remembered my sister's name. Hartwell reached for the sketch, took it back, and folded it along the original creases. He did not, sir, deserve to die with a key turned in his lock that was never his to turn. Poirot climbed the cellar stairs slowly. He went on his way up to the kitchen, where the cook was preparing the lunch. He asked, in his careful French, whether there was in the larder any bottle of medicine bearing the doctor's label. The cook brought him out at once 3 small green glass bottles on a tin tray. She said, without being asked, that these were the only ones that had been kept back so far from the doctor's usual delivery. They had been set aside, on the cook's own initiative, when the master had been taken ill. Why set aside, madame? Set aside because he was not the patient, monsieur. They were for the Lady Helena, and yet they had been sent over with his evening tea.
I thought it odd. I have been in this house 27 years, and the medicine for the lady is always delivered in the morning. These arrived with the tea things. Has Dr. Thorne been told that you set them aside? He has, monsieur. He asked me this morning whether any of the bottles had been sent to the dispensary. I told him that I had not disposed of any. And what did he say? He said that I should dispose of them at my convenience.
The cook's smile when she said this was the smile of a woman who has decided not to. Poirot slipped one of the bottles into his greatcoat pocket. He thanked her in a way that, with this cook, was the order of the day. He went out into the garden and stood for a moment on the path beside the honeysuckle bush. The boot print in the corridor, when he went back up to look at it again, was not pointing, as Hartwell's sketch had it, towards the study door. He rechecked with a small glass the heel mark. There was a streak of mud behind the heel, not in front of it. The boot had moved away from the study door at speed. Poirot stood for a moment in the empty corridor. He opened his notebook. He did not underline any of the names that were already in it. He added instead a question he had not asked before. Which of the household, in the last 10 minutes of the master's life, had not been where they said they were? Chapter 4. The Niece in the Bay Window. Eleanor Vance did not come down to breakfast. This was not in itself unusual. She had been in the habit since her arrival 6 months before of taking her morning chocolate in the small breakfast room at the back of the house, away from the long table and the long silences. What was unusual was that she had not sent word to Helena that she would not be at the table, and that when Helena's maid went up to her room with a fresh pot, the maid found the door standing ajar and the room empty. "Find her before lunch," Helena said, when the maid had come back downstairs. She was sitting on the bench in the small morning room with her hand over her eyes. "I cannot have her missing today of all days." Poirot, who had been in the morning room all along, looking over his notebook, replaced his pencil and said, "May I ask, mademoiselle, whether Lady Eleanor takes her walks, when she walks at all?" Helena did not look up. "She walks in the orchard mostly, in the mornings. She has done so since she came. She likes the apple trees." Poirot stood. He did not say so, but he knew that the small apple orchard behind the kitchen garden was the place where the housemaids went to gossip on their afternoon off, and where, in any given 7-year stretch, at least one of them had cried into her apron after a letter from home. It was not, in other words, a place one approached at the wrong hour in the wrong mood. He went to the orchard anyway. He found her at the tree at the northwest corner, sitting on the bench with one foot drawn up under her skirt and the other trailing in the dewy grass. She had been sitting there long enough for the dew to have soaked the hem of her coat through to the lining. She was holding a glove in her lap, a man's glove, dark leather, clearly not hers. The fingers had been folded back so that the lining was exposed. Inside, faintly in indelible ink, was the mark of a stationer in Calais. Eleanor did not look up when Poirot came and sat on the other end of the bench. She was not startled. She had been waiting for him. It was the kind of waiting that you can see in a person's hands, even from the other side of a long lawn. "They tell me," she said at last, "that my uncle was going to be buried on Thursday." "That is correct." "He was going to be buried in the family plot, beside my Aunt Margaret." He had the grave measured out in his mind before I came here. He sat in his study in the evenings and looked at the architectural drawing of the church and decided where to put himself. He had the stone ordered. He had the inscription written. The only thing he did not have was the date. Poirot waited. "He did not write me into the will, monsieur. I do not need to be disguised as anything. He left me a small sum of money and the rest of the apple boxes in the loft. That is all. I have known that for many weeks. I have been at peace with that. I have not been at peace with anything else." She held the glove a little higher, the way one holds a child up to be examined by a doctor. This glove came to me by post last Tuesday, from a man I had known in France. He has not been in this country. He sent it because he could not send me a letter, and because he wished me to know by the touch of the leather that there was something in the lining of the right-hand glove that I was to look at. May I? She handed him the glove. He turned it in his hand. The seam at the wrist was double-stitched. He opened the lining with the end of a paper knife from his pocket and drew out, folded into a square of oiled silk, a slim, foreign newspaper cutting. It was 1.5 years old. The headline, in small French, spoke of the death of a certain patient at the Hôpital Saint-Louis who had been treated by an English doctor with the unusual practice of prescribing a proprietary remedy of his own compounding. The English doctor had been cleared by the local inquest, but the cutting had been preserved with the aid of someone who had been paid to preserve it. The English doctor's name was not in the cutting. It was, however, beneath a line of small type, in the form of a partial signature that Poirot recognized as readily as he recognized his own. Marcus. He folded the cutting back into the glove. He handed it back to Eleanor. "Tell me, mademoiselle, who gave you this glove?" "My cousin, not Victor, his younger brother. He has been in France for 2 years, monsieur. He is the only one of the family who writes to me. He has been ill. He had been at the same hospital in the spring. He had been treated by the same doctor. And he knew. He knew enough to keep the cutting. He did not know enough to act. He sent it to me because I was closer." Poirot said nothing for a long time. A thrush in the apple tree above them sang twice and stopped. A piece of bark drifted down onto the grass, and Eleanor did not pick it up, and Poirot did not. "Then tell me what you have done since Tuesday, mademoiselle, in this house, with this glove, with this cutting." Eleanor looked at him. She was a pale girl of perhaps 25 years, with red about the rims of her eyes that did not come from crying. "On Wednesday morning I went into the kitchen, monsieur. On Wednesday afternoon I went into the dispensary, by the doctor's own courtesy. On Wednesday evening I went into the study, after the master had locked himself in, by way of the window. I did not open the window. I did not need to, because it had been left unlatched since the previous afternoon. I took the cutting. I did not take anything else from the room. I left the same way." Poirot looked at the bench. He bent and looked at her shoe, the one in the dewy grass. The sole was muddy. He did not point this out. "Yes," she said. "I was the one whose footprint you have been measuring, monsieur. I will not pretend it was anyone else. I came back to the house that night and went to my bed. The next morning my uncle was dead. The doctor came down at 8. Helena sent for you at 10. I did not sleep. I went in the morning to the kitchen because I could not sit in my room. I had the glove in my hand, and the kitchen maid saw me, but she did not see the cutting because the cutting was away. She said to me the next day, 'Miss Eleanor, you have grown very pale.' I said, 'I have been reading a French novel.'" Poirot closed his eyes. In the back of his mind, the numbers in the ledger were moving. He did not like the direction in which they were moving, but he respected the company. "Will you let me have the cutting, mademoiselle?" "You can have the cutting, but you will not be able to use it in the inquest. The doctor will tell you the inquest is closed. He will tell you the cause of death was the heart. He will tell you there was no poison. The cutting refers to an establishment in another country. He will say, 'What is one doctor's death in France against another doctor's verdict in England?' And yet you sent it to me." "And yet I sent it to you." Poirot said, "Why did you go into the study by the window, mademoiselle, when the door was open to you by way of the hall?" Eleanor looked at him for the first time without flinching. "Because at 7:15, monsieur, my uncle was reading the letter at his desk. The door was unlocked, and I had been told by my cousin that the doctor had been in the study with him from 6 to 1:15. I had been told that the doctor had left the study at 1:15. I had been told that my uncle alone had poured himself a glass of something and sat down to write. I did not wish to be seen by anyone entering that room while there was still a body in it. I did not wish to be seen doing the things I had to do in that room. I came by the window. Poirot held still. "And the things you had to do, mademoiselle?" "I had to look for the other letter, monsieur. The one to Mr. Graves. The one my uncle had been writing." "And did you find it?" "No. It was not in the drawer. It was not in the desk. It was not under the carpet. It had not been written yet, in the hour that I was in there. It had been written, of course. We found it under his hand. But he had not begun it when I was there. So either I was wrong about the time of my visit, or I was wrong about the doctor's leaving the room at 1:15. One of us is wrong, monsieur. I would prefer it to be me." She stood. She dusted the dew off her coat. She did not hand the glove back to Poirot, but she left it on the bench. As she walked away, she passed close enough that he might have reached out and touched her sleeve, but he did not, and she did not look round. When she had gone, he sat on the bench for a long time in the half-light of the orchard. He wrote in his notebook one line. The letter under his hand was not the first letter. He underlined it. In the dining room at 1:00, the household collected itself for lunch, as households will on the day of an inquest, and Poirot arranged matters so that he should sit beside Lady Beatrice. She, for her part, had not in 30 years of marriage to Sir Edmund been seen sitting beside any man at all who was not her own husband, and she was therefore disposed by habit to be civil, and Poirot was therefore disposed by practice to listen. She told him within the first 3 minutes that the second wife of a man in his 60s was, in any country house, a creature of marked inconvenience, and that she had in fact written once, in May, to a solicitor in town to ask about a quiet separation, and that she had not written since, and that she had destroyed the letter. She told him this as a confession. She told him that she had destroyed the letter because she had, in the end, decided to stay. "It was not for him, monsieur," she said. "It was for me. I had grown accustomed to this house. He had grown accustomed to me. He had stopped expecting me to be of any use to him. I had stopped expecting him to be of any use to me. We had a toleration. It was not love. But it is a thing that one does not throw away lightly in one's 50s. Poirot inclined his head. "And the letter to Mr. Graves, madame? Did you know of any letter he might have been writing last Tuesday evening?" Lady Beatrice looked at him across the tureen as though he had placed a frog in her soup. "He wrote to Mr. Graves every week, monsieur, about the orchards." "And on this Tuesday?" "On this Tuesday, monsieur, he wrote about the orchids." She did not say more. She lifted her spoon and went on with her soup. Poirot looked across the table at Helena. Helena was looking at her own plate. Victor was looking at the window. Eleanor was looking at no one. Chapter 5. Victor in the billiards room. Poirot walked into the billiards room at 3:15 on the afternoon of the inquest. He had asked to see Victor alone. He had not, on the way, told Victor that he was going to be asked any question at all. He had simply presented himself at the door in his greatcoat, with his notebook under one arm and his small case under the other, and had said, in the voice he used when he wished to be obeyed, that the master of the room would excuse him 10 minutes. Victor had been in the middle of a shot. He straightened up. He was younger than his years. He had the family's jaw and the family's pale eyes, and a mouth that he had been told all his life was too soft for a man. He looked at Poirot across the green cloth. "You can sit down, monsieur," Victor said, "but you will forgive me if I do not lay down my cue." "I would not have asked it of you." Victor took his shot.
It missed by a hand's breadth. He had been missing, Poirot knew from the steward, for the last 3 afternoons, since the races. He chalked the cue carefully, set it in the rack, and lowered himself into the chair with the air of a man who would rather have been anywhere else. "I am told, monsieur, that you were the last person to be in the billiards room on Tuesday evening." "Many people were in the billiards room on Tuesday evening, monsieur. James was here for the better part of an hour. He was looking for a misplaced cue-cloth. The doctor came in for his evening brandy." "And you, monsieur?" "I was here on and off. I came up from supper at 6:30.
I stayed until the bell rang for the kitchen to clear. What bell? There is a small bell by the mantel, connected to the kitchen by a wire. 8 o'clock every evening. It was rung by the cook. I have heard it every evening of my life." "Then you heard it on this Tuesday?" "I did not. The bell was not rung on Tuesday. James rang it by hand at the kitchen door because the wire was being repaired." Poirot bent forward. "And when you left the billiards room, where did you go?" Victor did not answer for a moment. He was, Poirot saw, choosing carefully between 2 lies he had rehearsed. "I went to find my father. I had not had the chance to ask him the question about the quarterly allowance. I knew where he would be. He sat in the study every evening after supper. The door would not have been locked. Knocked and walked in." "And did you knock and walk in, monsieur?" "No. The door was shut. I did not knock." "Why not?" Victor drew in his breath. He had a long, thin scar along the side of his jaw from a riding accident in his teens, and the scar whitened as he drew the breath. "Because when I put my hand to the latch, the doctor was inside. I heard my father's voice and the doctor's voice. I did not hear the words, they were not loud. The doctor spoke and my father spoke. Then there was a pause. Then the doctor's chair scraped on the boards." "And you left the door?" "I did. I went back to the billiards room. I had a small brandy. I went up to bed at 9:15. "What did you do in the billiards room between 7:15 and 9:15? "I sat with the brandy. I thought about my predicament. I had half a mind at one point to go down to the kitchen and put a bullet in my own head. I did not. I was afraid of the noise. That is the honest reason." Poirot let the answer settle. "And the debt, monsieur? You owed it on the Saturday's races?" £240, and the interest of 3 months, and a gentleman's promise to wait until Michaelmas. To whom, if I may ask, was the debt owed? To a Mr. Graves, the lawyer, who also manages the summer racing syndicate at Grantham. He also serves, as my father believed, as the family solicitor. He is not really the family solicitor. The real one is a Mr. Proctor of Boston. My father was aware of this. He had not been aware until last Tuesday of how much Mr. Graves had been managing the racing side of Victor Ashworth's interests and the family's interests together. He was not pleased. Poirot let his pencil lie still. He did not look up from his notebook. "Your father, monsieur, was on the point of writing a letter to Mr. Graves on this Tuesday evening. You have been told this, I expect, by your sister." "I have not. My sister does not speak to me of family business. My sister has not spoken to me of any business at all in the last 6 months. She is afraid of what I might say to her in answer. And yet the letter exists." "It was begun later in the evening than the hour at which you sat down to your brandy. There is a great deal of time in the billiards room between 7:15 and 9:15. Did anything happen in that time?" Victor stood. He laid down his cue. He walked to the window and looked out at the orchard. "Nothing happened in that time. There was no one in the billiards room. There was no one in the corridor. The doctor came down to the drawing room at 9 and read his book.
My mother came up from the drawing room at 9 and went to her room. James was in the cellar with the silver. I was alone. I was alone for an hour and a half. And his voice on that last sentence was the voice of a man who had been alone, in his own way, for an hour and a half where he sat. After he had gone, Poirot sat for 10 minutes at the billiards table, running the chalk slowly over the green cloth. He thought of the words the chalk made when he pressed it. He thought of the letters on the green baize in the racks. He thought of the letter under Sir Edmund's hand, which Victor had not, of course, written. He thought of the bell that was not rung. He thought of the wire that was being repaired. He thought of a household that habitually heard a sound that did not, on this Tuesday, arrive to interrupt the evening, and of how much can happen in the hour and a half in which no sound arrives to interrupt the evening. He went down to the kitchen and asked the cook, very courteously, whether she had rung the bell by hand on Tuesday, as James had said. She said she had not. She said James had rung it himself. He had asked her, very civilly, whether he might take the bell ringing from her for one evening, because the wire was being mended by the steward in the morning, and he wished to test the handbell by himself. She had been glad, she said, of the rest. She had not seen James between 6 and 9:15. She had not known who had been in the billiards room. She had known, because the kitchen door had been open to the passage, that the Lady Helena had been in the upstairs corridor at various times of the evening. She had known because she had heard Helena's slippers on the boards. She had known the doctor had been in the dispensary at various times of the evening. She had known because the dispensary lamp had been visible at the kitchen window. She said, with the same honesty with which she had spoken all afternoon, that no other person in the household had been in the kitchen passage between 6 and 9:15. Poirot thanked her. He went back to the morning room and opened his notebook and made a single note. James Hartwell was not in the cellar between 6 and 9:15 on Tuesday. He was at the bell. He was somewhere else. Then he put the notebook away and went upstairs, and on the landing outside the study he stood again, listening once more to the silence, the way a man listens when the wind has stopped on a lake, and he prepared in his head the question he would ask Dr. Thorne at dinner. Chapter 6. Helena's cloak and the doctor's tea. Helena came down to dinner in her mother's old cloak. It had been folded at the bottom of a trunk ever since the winter her mother had died, the winter Helena had been 8. It was a heavy green wool, with a small moth-eaten patch at the collar that she had mended herself, in a thread of the same color when she was 16. The cloak was too wide for her. She held it closed at the throat with a single hand. The hand had been shaking off and on all afternoon. Poirot watched her from the doorway of the dining room. He watched her the way he watched paintings in galleries when the room was empty. He was looking for the brushstroke, not the picture. When she sat down, she did not, for the first time since she had been old enough to manage a household, agree to parry Lady Beatrice's first pleasantry about the cold. She sat with the cloak still round her shoulders. The cloak was a small scandal in the household. Lady Beatrice had not been able to look at it all summer. "You will catch your death, my dear," Lady Beatrice said, and Helena did not answer. She leaned forward instead towards the doctor. Dr. Thorne was already at the table in his usual chair. He was eating his soup with the same methodical care with which he did everything. He had not, tonight, shaved as close as he did in the mornings. There was a tiny nick on his chin near the line of the collar. It was the first sign of inattention Helena had ever seen from him in 19 years. "Dr. Thorne," Helena said, "I have a question to put to you." The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone in them has set down a card the others did not think was in the deck. "Helena," Victor said from the end of the table, "perhaps not now." "Hush," Helena said without looking at him.
I have. I would ask it of him privately, but I cannot. I have no strength tonight for the private version. So I shall ask it now in front of my cousin and my stepmother and Mr. Poirot. I should be glad of an answer in front of witnesses. Poirot laid down his spoon. The doctor set down his. Helena, Dr. Thorne said, you are overwrought. You should not take dinner tonight. You should go to bed. James will bring you your usual remedy at 9. I will not take the remedy tonight, doctor. I will not take any remedy. I have not, in fact, taken any of your remedies for the last 6 days. I have been keeping them untasted in the little drawer of the bureau in my room. The doctor did not raise his head. Why, Helena, dear child? Because I have not trusted them. Because my father, on the Sunday before his death, said something to me that he should not have said, in his own front parlour, in front of the servants, which he would have said nowhere else. He said, My dear, if ever you think the doctor is taking too much care of your heart, ask him to show you the prescription in his files for the last 10 years. If he refuses, ask him for the consultation attendance book for the last 5. If he refuses again, do not take any more of his medicine until you have spoken to Mr. Proctor. I did not understand what he meant. I thought he was being childish. Then on Tuesday he said nothing more. He only sat in the small morning room and looked at me as if he was saying goodbye. The cloak at her throat moved a little, as if she had turned her head towards a sound the others could not hear. And so, doctor, I am asking you now. Will you show me the prescription? Will you show me the consultation book? Will you explain to me in this room what my father meant by saying that you had been taking too much care of my heart? Thorne did not raise his head. He sat for a long time with the napkin in his hand. The lamp on the sideboard threw a shadow across his face. The room, which had been silent before, was now silent in a different way. It was the silence of people who had just realized they were sitting on the edge of a hole. We will talk of it, Helena, Thorne said. Tomorrow morning, in the morning room, with the door closed. Not now. Not here. Why not here, Marcus? It was the first time in 19 years that Helena had called him by his given name. It struck the room like a small hammer. Thorne set the napkin down. He stood. He looked for once older than she did. I will not, Helena. I will not explain to you in front of your cousin or this gentleman. I will not explain to you in front of your stepmother. The matter between us belongs to me and you, and to no one else in this house. Poirot stood very politely and said, Will you then, Monsieur le Docteur, explain the matter to me in the morning room tomorrow? I will not have Helena in the room. I will not have anyone in the room. Only yourself and myself, and the information you are willing to give. The doctor did not say no. He left the room. He did not come back for his soup. Victor went out after him, after a moment, and was heard in the passage asking for a candle. Lady Beatrice, with the smallest of sighs, asked the butler to clear away the soup and to bring in the fish. Helena sat where she was. She did not eat. The cloak was still round her shoulders. The cloak's moth-eaten patch was catching the lamplight, the colour of old moss. At 9:30 she stood, and the cloak brushed the backs of the chairs as she walked, and she went upstairs alone. And Poirot heard her slippers on the boards, and after a while he heard a sound from her room that he did not wish to hear. It was the sound of a woman trying to breathe. In the morning room the next morning, before the doctor could be summoned, Poirot sat for a long time with the green glass bottle he had taken from the kitchen. He had sent the cook, by way of the steward, to the apothecary at the village with a polite request for an opinion. The apothecary had written, in his careful hand, that the contents were a saturated tincture of digitalis in a base of brandy. Foxglove. The flower that, in the wrong hands, will stop a heart as neatly as it steadies one.
Poirot looked at the green glass bottle, and he thought of the doctor who had taken too much care of a sick girl for 19 years. And he thought of the flower that grew all along the lane in July, beside the beeches of the kitchen garden. And he thought of the cutting in the glove from France, and of the name Marcus under the French headline, and of the patient at the Hôpital Saint-Louis whose death had been the doctor's ruin, in another country, in another life. He put the bottle away. He wrote in his notebook, "The doctor gave the daughter small doses to keep her close. He gave the master whatever was required to keep the master quiet. He was not, in the end, the daughter's doctor. He was the daughter's father."
He put the notebook away, exactly in the position the steward had placed it when he brought it. When the doctor arrived at 10:15, Poirot said, "Sit, please, monsieur." The doctor sat. Poirot did not ask him about the prescription. Poirot did not ask him about the consultation book. Poirot did not ask him about the letter to Mr. Graves. He asked him instead, in a voice as gentle as a man can be when he is closing a door, "Doctor, when did you last see your daughter?" The doctor's face went, for the first time in 19 years, the color of the dawn. "My daughter, monsieur?" "Yes, doctor. Helena. When did you last see her? Not the patient, not the lady. Your daughter." Chapter 7. The music box in the parlor. The music box had stood on the parlor mantel since before the war. It was a small, dark walnut thing the size of a prayer book, with inlays of bone that had yellowed with age, and a single drawer underneath for the tiny brass key. Helena had wound it every Sunday of her life, ever since she had been tall enough to reach the mantel unaided. And the tune had always come out the same, a slow dance in three-quarter time that her mother had once heard, in another century, at a wedding in Vienna. On Thursday afternoon, after the inquest, she wound it again. The tune began in the right key. It came out by the second bar in the wrong key. By the fourth bar it had slowed, as if the works were tired of their own motion, and by the eighth bar it had stopped entirely with a small wooden click. Helena stood with the key in her hand. She said aloud to the empty room, "That is not how it goes." It was not. Lady Beatrice, passing the doorway on her way to the writing table, did not, however, stop to investigate the cause. She had her own small trouble on her mind. She had been the one who had heard, in the small hours of that night, the sound of someone on the stairs. For Poirot was upstairs. He had been all morning in the upstairs corridor. He had, with the steward's permission, taken the small Japanese paper knife from the stationery box in the morning room, and he had been running it, very gently, along the seam of the wallpaper at the point where the corridor turns towards the study. The wallpaper was an old English print, foxed at the edges, and the seam had been painted over by a young housekeeper in 1890. The paper knife found, after a careful half-inch, the corner of a small rectangle that had been folded and wedged behind the lining, and Poirot drew it out, with the patience of an archivist from the Vatican Library, and unfolded it on his knee. It was a letter. The paper was a soft, milky blue. The ink was brown. The postmark was Vienne. The date was 11 years old, in early September. It said, "Mon cher Marcus, I have done as you asked. I will go to England in October. The baby is yours, you know. Edmund has been kind. He has accepted her as his. He is glad of a child. He will not look for further proof. I have not told him about Vienna. I will not. I will keep your secret for the rest of my life. I will keep mine. Yours, M." The baby, in the autumn of 1923, had been Helena. The mother had been Edmund's first wife, Margaret. The doctor had been, by his own signature under another name, in another language, the child's father. Poirot held the letter in his hand for a long time. He did not need to ask who had put it behind the paper.
The paper had been put there by the one person in the house who had known where it had been, by the person who had been paid in 1924 to redecorate the corridor in its present paper, and who had been told, by the master's own hand, that the seam would not be opened again. James Hartwell had known the seam's secret for 31 years. He had not, until Tuesday of last week, been able to imagine what use it might be. Until, on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, the doctor had walked into the master's study and had not walked out again, except with his hands in his pockets and his head a little lower than usual. Until the master, alone at his desk, had reached behind his own wallpaper for the letter he had kept there for a quarter of a century. He had reached for it, of course. He had reached for it because he had been about to write to Mr. Graves, and because, just before he wrote to Mr. Graves, he had wanted the letter in his own hand as proof, as ammunition. He had wanted Margaret's words under his fingers when he had sat down to bring the man down. But he had not reached behind the paper. The letter was still there. The master had died, on his chair, with his hand on the drawer of the desk, not on the wallpaper. Poirot stood for a long time in the corridor with the letter in his hand. The wind off the creek had been sharpening all afternoon. The honeysuckle had closed for the season. In the parlour at tea-time, Helena did not wind the music box again. She stood instead with her hand on its lid and her back to the door. Poirot came in without knocking. He had the letter in his hand. He did not, however, give it to her. He set it instead on the small table by the music box, and he said, in a voice as soft as the one with which he had ordered the green glass bottle to be sent to the apothecary, "I have a question, mademoiselle. I have been unwilling to put it to you. I am still unwilling. But you have asked me to be honest with you, and I am in the end an honest man. So I will ask you. Where is your mother buried?" Helena did not turn. "In the family vault, monsieur, in the church, beside her husband." "And beside her husband, you say? Not beside her own father?" Helena did not turn. The cloak at her throat moved just once. "My mother had no father, monsieur." "No," Poirot said, "she did not. But she had a husband, and she had before him a physician, and she had a child." Helena turned. She was, in the parlour light, a small, thin woman. Her eyes were not red. They were the colour of slate. They were the eyes of someone who has been walking a long time towards a door she has always hoped would not be opened. "Monsieur," she said, "I have been unwell since I was born. I have been told all my life that I was born with a weakness of the heart. I have been told in the last 6 days by the family itself that my father was going to send my brother away. I have been told by you this afternoon that my mother had a physician, and a child, and a husband. Yes. Which of these 3, monsieur, is the father of the child?" Poirot did not move. "The physician, mademoiselle. The physician is the father of the child." Helena looked at him for a long time. She did not move. She did not weep. She did not understand at first what he had said. Then, the way one understands a word in a foreign language that one has been studying for 40 years, she understood. "Dr. Thorne," she said. "Yes." "My doctor."
"Thorne? Yes. The man who has been treating me since I was 8. Yes. The man who has been keeping me alive. Yes, mademoiselle. He has been keeping you alive. He has also, I am sorry to say, been keeping you alive." Helena looked at him for a moment longer. Then she sat down in the chair by the music box. The cloak lay over the arms of the chair. The music box was open. The key was in it. She said at last, "Why did he kill my father, monsieur?" The room was quiet. The wind had stopped entirely. Because your father, mademoiselle, was about to tell the world.
And would the world, monsieur, have been the worse for telling?
Poirot closed his eyes. He did not, in all his life, answer that question quickly. The world would have been the worse for telling. The world would have lost a young woman, a name, an inheritance, a place in a family, a life. Dr. Thorne had been right about that. He had been wrong about the rest. He had decided that the world could be spared the loss. He had decided on his own that the world could be spared the loss for 19 years. He had decided that on Tuesday evening, by the time the master had taken out his pen, he could no longer be allowed to decide on his own. He killed your father, mademoiselle, because he was afraid of losing you. Helena did not move.
He was your father, monsieur, by blood, and he killed my father by law, for love of me.
Yes, mademoiselle.
And the medicine, monsieur, the foxglove, the one he has been giving me for 19 years, is it the same?
Poirot opened his eyes. It is the same.
Is it killing me?
In small doses, mademoiselle, as all good medicines will in the wrong hands. He has been keeping your heart steady by giving you just enough of the poison to keep it in his hand.
And if I stop taking it?
You will be ill, mademoiselle, for a time, perhaps for a long time, but you will not be killed by him. Helena looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then she said, with the smallest twist at the corner of her mouth that Poirot had ever seen in a life of watching mouths,
"It has been in a fashion, a long time, monsieur, since anyone has treated my heart as his own. I should like, perhaps, to keep it."
Chapter 8. James and the Lamp in the Cellar. James Hartwell had not slept on Thursday night. He had been in the cellar again with the silver. But this time, instead of counting it, he was laying it out in rows on the long oak table, the way he had laid it out for the photographer when the county history was being prepared in 1911. He was preparing an inventory. Poirot found him there at 7:15. He had been awake himself since 5. He had not yet had his coffee. He had not yet had his breakfast. He had been reading for the 3rd time the cutting in the glove from France.
"Mr. Hartwell,"
he said from the top of the cellar stairs,
"I have come to thank you for the sketch, and to ask, if you will, one small further question."
Hartwell turned. He set down the silver spoon he had been holding. He said in the careful voice he used with people he did not entirely trust,
"What is the question, sir?"
"The lamp, Mr. Hartwell, in the dispensary, on Tuesday evening. Was it lit?" Hartwell thought for a long time.
"The doctor's lamp, sir, in the dispensary window?"
"Yes."
"It was not lit, sir, between 6 and 9. The doctor's dispensary lamp is usually lit for half an hour after his evening surgery, when he is putting up the medicine for the morning. On Tuesday it was not lit. The cook noticed. She thought he had finished his work early."
"And what did you think?" Hartwell looked at him for a long time, and there was on his face the strange look of a man who is about to be set free of a thing he has been carrying for 31 years.
"I thought, sir, that the doctor had been in the study for a long time. I thought he had been in there since 5. The bell was rung at 6 for the supper to be sent up to the room. The supper was sent up. The doctor went into the study with the master in his shirt sleeves, and he did not come out, except at 7:15, when he came out to the drawing room. He was in the drawing room for about 10 minutes. He read his book. He went back to the dispensary at 6:15. He was not there long. He went back into the study at 6:50.
"This you saw with your own eyes, Mr. Hartwell?"
"From the cellar window, sir. The dispensary window faces the kitchen garden. I can see it when there is a lamp behind it. I happened to look up at it at 20 to 7. He was not there. I looked up at it at 10 to 7. He was there. I saw his shadow. And after 10 to 7? I went up to the kitchen to ring the bell. I stood by the bell rope for a moment. I heard, sir, a sound in the corridor upstairs. I did not hear any words. I heard only a single short syllable from the direction of the study. I cannot tell you whose voice it was. What kind of syllable, Mr.
Hartwell, it was the sound a man makes, sir, when he has been struck unto the heart. He does not cry out. He does not have breath enough for a full cry. He says only the first syllable of a word he was about to say, and the breath leaves him. Poirot looked at him. How do you know that sound, sir? My father was a railwayman, sir, who had been run over by a goods train in 1912. He lived 4 minutes after the wheel passed over him. I held his hand. I heard the sound he made. It was the sound of the breath leaving the body before the body has time to call for help. There was a silence in the cellar. The silver lay on the table in its neat rows. The lamp above the workbench threw a long yellow light. So you heard it in the corridor on Tuesday at 10 to 7? I heard it, sir. And you went to the kitchen, and you rang the bell, and you did not go to the study? I did not go to the study, sir. That was not for me. That was for the family. I am the steward, sir, not the family. And so the bell was not rung because the master was dead. There was no master to ring for, sir. There was no one in the kitchen passage. The cook was in her room. The doctor was not in his room. The Lady Helena had not come down. The Lady Eleanor had not come down. Miss Beatrice was at the writing table. The young gentleman was in the billiards room. The cook heard nothing. And yet you rang the bell, Mr. Hartwell, by hand, at 7:15. You said the wire was being mended. The wire was being mended, sir, and the bell was rung by hand by me at the master's funeral time. It was not rung, sir, because the master asked for it. It was rung because I wished it to be heard, by whoever was on the stairs, that the kitchen was, for once, awake. It was rung because I thought that if someone had killed our master, the sound of the bell would compel them to stop. The sound was meant, sir, as a witness. Poirot bowed his head. And how long, Mr. Hartwell, did you intend the bell to be a witness without saying what it had witnessed? For as long as it took, sir. I have been waiting for 31 years, sir, for someone to ask me to say what I had witnessed. I have not been bidden. You have been bidden now, sir. I bid you. What was the witness? The witness, sir, was the sound of the door of the study being unlocked. It was the sound of a hand on the inside of the lock. It was the sound of the latch moving, and of someone leaving the room. You heard, sir, in the corridor outside the study, the sound of the lock being drawn back at 7:15. I heard, sir, at 7:15, after the bell was rung, after I had been myself to the kitchen, after I had been back at the bell rope. I went up to the dispenser on the step-ladder in the corridor. I went up, sir, to clean a window. I went up because I had a reason to be there. At 7:15 I heard the lock of the study. I heard it being drawn from the inside by a hand he did not know I had heard. And the lock being drawn was not the master, because the master was already dead. Yes, sir, the master was already dead. The hand was the doctor's. The doctor had been inside. The doctor locked the door. The doctor unlocked the door. The doctor went out through the hall to the kitchen, to the dispensary. He was back at the dispensary by 7:30. He had already returned to his chair by the time Helena had come down at 7:30. He had already returned to his chair, sir, by the time Helena asked me to come with her to the door. We did not, sir,
find a dead man behind the locked door. We found, sir, an empty room with a lamp burning and a body that had been moved by the doctor from where the bell had rung him down. Poirot listened. And what did the doctor do with the key, Mr. Hartwell? He carried it in his waistcoat pocket, sir. He carried it to the morning room on Wednesday morning. He had it in his hand when he sat down to breakfast. He played with it under the napkin. He put it back in his waistcoat pocket. He forgot it, sir, when he went to the post in the village after breakfast. The postmistress sent it back to the house on the noon post. I have it here, sir. I have had it since Wednesday. Hartwell reached into his breast pocket. He brought out a small brass key on a thin black silk ribbon. He laid it on the silver table between them. Poirot looked at the key. The key had been polished with the soft cloth of a waistcoat pocket for almost a week. Will you give it to me, Mr. Hartwell? It was never mine, sir. It was the master's. I am glad to be rid of it. Poirot took the key upstairs. He had not yet gone to his breakfast. The household had not yet sat down. The morning was very quiet. He opened the study door with the brass key on the black silk ribbon and walked inside, and stood for a long time looking at the desk. The desk was as it had been, except for one thing. The half-written letter to Mr. Graves was no longer there. The ink had dried into the leather of the desk. The desk had been wiped. Poirot opened the desk. He found in the middle drawer the cutting from the French newspaper. He had not put it there. He had left it on Wednesday afternoon in his notebook. It had been removed by someone from his notebook and placed in the desk. He found also the green glass bottle emptied and set at the back of the drawer on a folded handkerchief. He sat in the master's chair. He rested 2 fingers on the drawer where the master's hand had rested when Helena had found him. He listened again the way he had listened on Tuesday for the sound of the breath leaving the body. He heard instead the very small sound of a key being placed on a desk outside the door. Chapter 9. The Second Father. The sound was not a key. Poirot sat in the dead man's chair and did not move for the space of 3 long breaths. The sound from beyond the study door was the sound of someone in the corridor who had stopped walking. A pause in which the floorboard did not creak again. A pause in which no door opened and no step retreated. A listening pause. He stood, set the green glass bottle gently on the blotter, and crossed to the door. Dr. Thorne was in the corridor. He was standing with his back against the opposite wall, hands in his coat pockets, his overcoat still on, as if he had just come in from outside, which he had not, because it had been raining since 7:30 and his coat was dry. He looked for the first time since Poirot had arrived at Willow Creek House, like a man who had decided, at the last possible moment, to stop moving. "I was waiting for you," the doctor said. "I had supposed so," Poirot said. "I had supposed you had supposed so." Thorne looked at the study door. "May I?" Poirot stepped aside. The doctor walked in. He went, without appearing to search for it, directly to the chair beside the window. Not the dead man's chair, which Poirot had vacated, but the small reading chair under the half-pulled curtain where, by the state of the armrests, Sir Edmund had done his evening reading for 20 years. Thorne sat in it. He sat in it as if he had sat there before, because he had. This was where he had sat for 19 years of evening consultations. He knew its creak, its tilt, the angle at which the window gave him just enough lamplight. He looked at the empty teacup on the side table. "You had the bottle sent to the apothecary," he said. "I did." "He will have found foxglove." "He did, in a saturated tincture, in a base of brandy." "Yes, that is the preparation." Thorne pressed his hands together on his knee. They were surgeon's hands, Poirot noticed, long-fingered, very steady.
I have been giving it to Helena in small, regular doses since she was 8 years old. I told Edmund it was for her heart, which was not entirely false. She does have a weakness, a genuine one. But the doses I gave her were not what I would have given a patient whose weakness I was solely intending to correct. No. They were the doses of a man who was afraid, a man who needed to be needed, a man who had given up any right to love and who had substituted care for it. His thumb pressed into his palm. I am not asking for mercy, monsieur. I am not asking for understanding. I am telling you what I did, because the telling is, at this point, the only thing that belongs to me. Poirot sat in the dead man's chair. He crossed one leg over the other and folded his hands in his lap. The rain had begun to come harder at the window. The lamp on the desk threw a long shadow. When did Sir Edmund know about the child? Poirot said. He had always known. We had an agreement in 31 when Margaret died. He would raise Helena as his own. He would not mention my name, not in the will, not in any document, not in any conversation. I would attend the house in my professional capacity only. I would not reveal the connection. And he kept this. He kept it for 31 years. He was a man of his word, Edmund Ashworth. A difficult man, not always kind, not always patient, but a man of his word. And what changed this last month? Thorne looked at the curtain. The rain was making a sound against the glass that was just above the edge of silence. He found the ledger. Not this ledger. There is another one, a private one, kept by his accountant in town. He found it in September when he went to town to speak with Proctor, the real solicitor. Proctor had taken over from old Finch in the summer, and Proctor is a younger man, and younger men ask different questions. He found that I had been drawing a fee against the estate for a private dispensary preparation since 1923, at 3 times the going rate. He found that Helena's medical bills had been the largest single item in the household accounts, consistently, for 11 years. He brought the ledger back to the house. He put it on the morning room table and laid it open at the relevant page and asked Helena, in front of the cook, whether she had known. She had not. She cried. He comforted her, poorly, and told her she was not to speak of it until he had made inquiries. And then he wired for Mr. Greaves, the solicitor, and he wrote the letter. He was going to do more than that. He was going to wire for the police. He had the telegram in his desk ready to be taken down on Wednesday morning. He had the letter for Mr. Proctor on the same desk. He had the letter to the coroner's committee. He had, on the back of the envelope for the coroner, a note, in his own hand, of the name of the hospital in France where I had lost the patient in Vienna. He had been corresponding with a colleague of mine, a man named Favre, who had been present during the affair. He had been corresponding with him, monsieur, since the spring. Poirot said nothing. The rain came harder. He had been building this, monsieur, very quietly for 6 months, since Helena's birthday in March. He gave her a birthday dinner, and he watched her take her bottle at the end of the meal, and he watched my face while she did. And something crossed his face that I had not seen before. He looked at me the way a man looks when he has already decided what he is going to do. And so you decided first. Thorne pressed his hands together. The thumb went white against the bone. I put the foxglove in his tea, not in the kitchen. He brought the tea things himself that evening from the sideboard. I was alone with him for the last 15 minutes of the session. He had on the table between us the cut from the French newspaper. Not Eleanor's cut. He had his own copy, sent by Favre in July. He held it in his hand, face down, and tapped it on the table like a card at cards, and he said, in the quietest voice I had ever heard him use, that he was going to give me 1 evening to make my arrangements, and that by morning I was to have left the county. Poirot watched him. He was, you see, monsieur, still trying to protect Helena.
He had not told her. He did not want her to know until I was gone. He wanted to write the letters first and post them and have me removed, and then tell her in his own way, in his own time. He was a difficult man, Edmund Ashworth. He was a difficult man who, in his last evening, was doing the gentlest thing he had done in 30 years. Thorne looked at the empty teacup. And I put the foxglove in his tea. After he had said he would give you one evening. Before he had finished saying it. I had it in my hand already, in the small medical case I carry everywhere. I had carried it since September, since the ledger. I had been telling myself for 6 months that I might find a reason not to use it. On Tuesday I found that there was no such reason. And the locking of the door? I locked it when I left. I had the key from his waistcoat pocket. I did not intend to lock it.
I took the key because I had a notion that if I had it in my hand, the room would feel less like the place I had just destroyed. The key was his. He had polished it every Sunday. He carried it on his watch chain for as long as any of us could remember. I held it and I thought that everything I had done in 30 years had been an attempt to keep Helena from this exact moment. From knowing what her parents were. From knowing what she was. From knowing what I had made of her in an attempt to keep her close. And instead I had given her, monsieur, precisely the same thing I had tried to give Edmund. I had given her a very small, very slow poison, and called it care. The rain at the window had settled to a long, quiet note, just below silence. The lamp was lower. Poirot stood. He walked to the window and put his hand on the curtain and drew it back a fraction. The garden below was dark. The honeysuckle bush was a shadow against the wall. The apple trees were lost in the rain. "There is one thing I must ask you, monsieur," Poirot said. "Ask." "The cutting from the French newspaper. It had been placed by someone in the middle drawer of this desk before I arrived this morning. The cutting had been taken from my notebook. Who placed it there?" Thorne was quiet for a moment. "I did. I wished you to find it in this room. I wished you to find it here rather than among your own papers, because I wished you to understand that I had known about Eleanor's visit to this room before you did. I had seen her at the window. I had gone to the window myself later, when Helena had gone to bed, to verify the latch. I found the oiled silk in the garden below. I knew the cutting had been in this room. I placed it back. I wished you to know that I had done so. You wished to tell me, without saying so, that you knew that Eleanor knew. Yes. And yet you said nothing to Eleanor. She is not my concern, monsieur. And yet, doctor, is Helena not hers? Thorne looked at him. Eleanor, Poirot said, came to this house 6 months ago at the request of Sir Edmund. She was not invited by the family. She was invited by him. He invited her because he needed a witness who was young enough to be believed and foreign enough to be trusted. He had been corresponding with her cousin, the young man in France, since the spring. He had asked the cousin to find him someone who had been close to the affair in France. Eleanor had been at the hospital in the spring when the cousin was treated. She had been treated there herself for a separate ailment, and had spoken with the doctor on the ward who remembered the name Marcus from 6 years before. She had written to Edmund in May. He had responded in June. She had arrived in July. Thorne stared at him. Sir Edmund, Poirot said, invited Eleanor Vance to this house as his second witness. He had Favre in France and Eleanor here. He was not, doctor, a man who acted in haste. Thorne stood. He was very still in the low lamplight. He knew, Thorne said slowly. He knew all summer that she was. He knew who she was, monsieur.
He knew why she was here. He let her stay and did not tell you because he was a man of 31 years of patience, and he was willing to wait until he had the proof he needed.
The doctor's face in the lamplight had gone the color of the old milk-blue letter that Poirot still had in his breast pocket. He put one hand on the arm of the reading chair as if he needed it. "I have killed a better man than myself," he said. Poirot said nothing. He turned back to the curtain and let it fall. From the room above, very faintly, through the floor, came the sound of a music box. It started in the right key. It went to the second bar without stopping. It played through to the 8th bar. It did not stop. Chapter 10. Eleanor at the window. She was not in her room when Poirot went up. The room had been left for a number of minutes, in the precise disorder of someone who had not intended to leave it. The candle by the bed had burned down to a small puddle of wax. The travelling case, which had been propped against the wall since her arrival, was open on the chair. Inside it, neatly folded, were the things she had brought from France in the spring. A dark wool dress, a paper knife with a horn handle, 2 pairs of silk stockings rolled into a ball, a small brown book of Verlaine's poems, the postage stamp album she had been collecting since she was a girl. The gloves were on the dressing table. The men's glove, the one from her cousin, was not there. Poirot stood for a moment in the doorway. The wind, off the creek, was loud enough at this hour to be making the panes ring in their frames. He did not hurry. He went to the dressing table and looked at the gloves, and at the small silver tray beside them. On the tray, beneath the powder, was a folded piece of notepaper. It was, like the apron her Aunt Margaret used to have, milky blue. The handwriting was not Eleanor's. The handwriting was Helena's. It said, "Eleanor, don't go by the lane. Come by the orchard. I have left the back gate unlatched. I will be there at 10. H." Poirot looked at the note. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket beside the milk-blue letter from Vienna. He went out into the corridor and went down the back stairs, which no one else in the house used, and crossed the empty kitchen on the soft flagstones and let himself out through the larder door. The rain had not stopped. The orchard was dark. The apple trees threw long shadows on the wet grass. He took the path northwest to the bench where he had sat with Eleanor the day before. He did not hurry. The rain was on his shoulders before he had covered half the lawn. He saw them at the bench before he saw the back gate. Helena was sitting in the same place she had sat when she was a child, in her mother's green cloak, with her hands folded over her knees. Eleanor was standing at the gate, holding it open, looking back towards the house. Her face, in the small light that came off the kitchen window, was pale and set. She was talking in a low voice to someone on the other side of the gate. Poirot stopped. He stood behind the trunk of the largest apple tree and did not announce himself. The rain had brought out the smell of the apple wood, the way rain always does in autumn. Eleanor was saying, "There is no one on the path." "Stay on the grass. Stay out of the light." A voice replied from beyond the gate in French. The voice was a young man's. The voice said, "She is in the house?" "She is in the house, monsieur. You must not go inside. The Belgian will see." "He has seen me already." "No, he has not. He saw the cutting in the glove." "He has not seen you." "He has seen the letter under the paper. He has seen me in the cutting. He has seen my sister's face when she saw the glove. He has seen me." "He has not seen you, Augustin. Be still." The young man at the gate was quiet. Poirot did not move. The young man said after a moment, "I cannot come all this way, Eleanor, and not speak with her." "You will speak with her tomorrow, by the morning train, not tonight." "Tomorrow she will not be alive." "She will be alive tomorrow. I will see to it." "How?"
Eleanor did not answer for a moment. The rain had begun to come down harder. The gate rattled slightly under her hand.
"I will go upstairs," she said. "I will go to her room. I will sit with her. I will sit with her until Mr. Poirot has gone downstairs. I will tell her what she has a right to know. She has been wanting to know it for 19 years. She has been set up on a shelf like a wedding cake decoration, and I have had enough of it." "You do not have the right." "I have the right of being the only other young woman in this house. That is the right. It is not a grand right, but it is mine."
Helena on the bench had not moved. She had been listening without seeming to listen, the way people listen when they have spent 19 years in a household when no one tells them what they have a right to know. She said in a voice that did not carry,
"Eleanor."
Eleanor turned.
"Yes? Don't. Not yet."
Eleanor walked back across the wet grass. She sat down on the bench beside Helena. The cloak brushed her shoulder. Helena did not look up.
"I have been,"
Helena said,
"the most loved girl in this county for 19 years. I have been the most loved girl, and I have been the smallest. I have been carried from the cradle, and I have been carried to my chair, and I have been carried from my chair. I have been carried past every door, in and out, and I have never been let stand up."
Eleanor did not speak.
"I would like tonight to stand up,"
Helena said. Eleanor reached out and put a hand on the cloak. She did not open the cloak. She did not pull Helena to her feet. She did not take her to the gate. She sat with her in the rain for what felt, to the man under the apple tree, a long time. Then she said,
"We will go back to the house. We will go by the kitchen door. We will go upstairs. You will lie down. I will sit with you. Tomorrow the Belgian will have done his work, and you will have a name of your own, and the medicine will be gone, and the music box will play to the end of its tune, and I will sit across the room and not say another word to you for as long as you wish."
Helena stood up. The cloak hung about her shoulders. She did not look at the gate. She did not look at the young man at the gate. She took Eleanor's arm and walked back through the lawn to the kitchen door. The young man at the gate stood in the rain for a long moment. Then he lifted the latch and let himself in. He walked across the lawn and went straight to the man under the apple tree. He was a slight young man of perhaps 23. He had dark hair and dark eyes and the kind of mouth that, in a different family, would have been called gentle. He had been carrying a small leather bag. He set it down under the apple tree and stood before Poirot in the rain, in his coat, with water running off the brim of his hat.
"I am Augustin Favre," he said. "I am the nephew of the doctor who died in Vienna. I am the cousin of Eleanor Vance. I am the son of the man who kept the cutting."
Poirot inclined his head.
"You have come a long way, monsieur." "I have come a long way, monsieur. My father, who was a banker in Lyon, did not keep the cutting because he had a quarrel with Dr. Thorne. He kept it because he had been in the room when the patient died. He had been 17. He had been at the hospital as a visitor because the patient had been a friend of the family. He had been in the room all afternoon." "And he had seen?" "He had seen, monsieur, that the doctor had been giving the wrong dose on the wrong day. He had not been sure of it. He had not, at 17, been sure of anything. He had been sure for 30 years that something was wrong. He had been sure enough when Sir Edmund wrote to him in May to send the cutting to his nephew to give, in turn, to Sir Edmund." Poirot said, "And to Eleanor?" "And to Eleanor, monsieur, as a precaution, because my father, in his last letter, said, 'Send the cutting to anyone in England who is not afraid.' And the only person in his judgment who was not afraid was the niece." Poirot looked at the young man.
You have come to be of use, monsieur. Of some use. To confirm to my face that the doctor was in the room. That the doctor is the father of Helena. That my father was in the room when the patient died and watched him die. You will need to give evidence at the inquest. I will. Tomorrow. I have come by the morning train, as my sister said. You will need to speak to Mr.
Proctor of Boston. He is the real solicitor. He will be able to advise you as to the safety of your position. The young man inclined his head. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said in a small voice, She has been unwell, monsieur, all her life. She has been unwell because of him. Will it be possible, after all this, to keep her alive? Poirot looked for the first time in the conversation directly at the young man. He said in a voice that was as careful as a hand lifting a glass, We will do our best, monsieur. She has been, in her own way, the most loved girl in this county for 19 years. She is going to be, in a smaller way, for the rest of her life, the most loved girl in a smaller county. She will live to walk the lane in summer. I will see to it. The young man nodded. He lifted his bag from the wet grass. They walked together through the rain to the kitchen door of Willow Creek House. The clock on the kitchen mantel struck 10. Above them, on the upstairs landing, a door was being gently closed. In the corridor of the second floor, behind the door of Helena's room, Eleanor sat in the straight-backed chair by the window and held the cloak for the woman in the bed, who was sleeping, for the first time in 6 days, without the medicine, without dreaming, on her own breathing. The music box on the parlor mantel below them went on playing. Chapter 11. The End of the Tune. Friday began with a sky the color of a bruise and a wind that came up the brook and shook the beeches against the kitchen garden. The inquest was scheduled for 10. The coroner, Mr. Doyle, had come over from town the evening before with his clerk and had stayed at the inn, and the innkeeper had been known for 30 years to be a man who did not sleep when a public matter was in the offing. Poirot had not slept either. He had been since 4 in the morning room with the milk-blue letter and the empty green glass bottle, and a small piece of paper on which he had been writing, in his careful hand, the names of the people who were to be present at the inquest. The list had grown long. He had crossed 3 names off. He had added 1. He had walked out to the front steps at 9, where the young man from France, Augustin, was waiting in his coat, with Eleanor at his side. The young man had not shaved. He had been awake the whole of the night. His uncle, the banker, had died in the spring, and Augustin had taken over the family papers in Lyon, in a small office above a butcher's shop, and he had not been back to England since he was a child. He had known, when he came this time, that he would not be here as a visitor. Poirot had looked at him and at Eleanor, and at the small leather bag the young man had set down on the steps. He had inclined his head. He had not said anything. He had gone back inside and asked the butler, who had been with the family for 40 years, whether there had been any further development during the night. The butler had told him, with the air of a man reporting the tide, that Dr. Thorne had gone out by the kitchen garden at 6 o'clock and had not been seen since. He had taken a small case with him. He had left a letter on the morning room sideboard, addressed to no one in particular. Poirot had read the letter. It had been a short letter. It had said, "To whom it may concern among the family. I have gone to London by an early train. I do not intend to return. I have left in the small cabinet in the dispensary, marked with my name, the formulae of every preparation I have given the Lady Helena in the last 19 years. The doses, the reasons, the contraindications, all are recorded. The notebook in which I have kept her case from the beginning is in the same cabinet, in the second drawer, under a small linen cover. I have not been a good man. I have not been a kind man.
I have been a man who has loved a child beyond any right of mine, and who, having so loved her, has kept her in a cage of medicine rather than set her free. I am writing this letter at 5:15 on Friday morning, in the small room over the kitchen by the lamp in the rain. I am writing it for her, and for Sir Edmund, whom I have wronged. Marcus. Poirot had not commented on it. He had asked the butler whether the letter might be left, sealed, where it was, until after the inquest. The butler had said, with the gravity of a man who has had 40 years of training, that the letter could remain where it was, sir, until such a time as the gentleman of the house should find it convenient to read it. At 10, the household gathered in the long drawing-room. Lady Beatrice sat in the chair by the fire with her hands folded and a small grey glove in her lap. She had not taken off her travelling cloak. She had been, since 6 o'clock, considering whether she would be obliged, by propriety, to go up to London for a season. She had decided on the whole that she would not.
Victor sat at the end of the room. He had shaved. He had put on a dark tie. He had a glass of something on the small table beside him that he had not touched. He was looking, for the first time since Poirot had arrived at Willow Creek, like a young man who had begun to be aware that the household he had been living in, with the rents unpaid and the debts unminded, was in fact a household with an unrecorded history. He had not spoken to his sister all morning. He had not spoken to anyone except the coroner, who had sent him a note by a boy from the village. Eleanor sat in the bay window with her cousin. Augustin had not entered the drawing-room. He had taken a chair in the small ante-room with the door open, so that the coroner's clerk could have a clear line of sight of him from the drawing-room. He had been told by Poirot to sit where he was. He had been told also to say what he had come to say in a voice the clerk could take down without straining. Helena was not in the drawing-room. She was upstairs with the family solicitor, Mr. Proctor, who had come down by the morning train and had been, since 7, in conversation with her. She had not wished to come down. She had not wished to be present when the inquest began. She had been given, by Poirot's instruction, no medicament since Tuesday evening, and she had been sitting up on her own in the small chair by the window, with the cloak folded at the foot of the bed and a cup of black tea on the side table. She had been watching from the window the small path that led down to the gate where, on Wednesday, a small dark figure had walked back through the rain. She had been watching it for what she said was the length of time it would have taken, in another life, to walk to the gate and back. Mr. Proctor had spent, in the last 3 hours, going over, in a low and careful voice, the contents of the milk-blue letter and the cutting from France, and the small notes that Sir Edmund had left in his desk. He had written with his own pen, in his own book, the 4 pages that would, in the coming weeks, become the family's new account of itself. Poirot rose at 11:15. The coroner came in from the ante-room with his clerk, and the inquest began. It was short. The doctor had disappeared, and the inquest had therefore become, by force of circumstance, a matter that could only be resolved, in the legal sense, by an adjournment. Mr. Doyle said so. He said that the doctor had, on the morning of the inquest, absented himself from the county, and that the inquest would therefore be adjourned until such a time as the doctor could be brought back to give evidence in his own defence. He said also, with a brief sigh, that the doctor had written a letter which the Belgian had undertaken to deliver in due course to the family, and that the contents of that letter would, very likely, have a bearing on the matter. He did not, however, open the letter in court. Augustin Favre was called. He came up, modest, and stood before the bench. He gave his name and his address in Lyon, and his family connection with the late banker of that city, and the hour of his arrival by the morning train from London. He gave, in plain words, the contents of his father's letters, and of the cutting from the French newspaper, and of the partial signature under the small headline. He gave them in French, slowly enough for the clerk to take down. He did not raise his voice. He did not begin to weep. He said that, on the morning of the inquest, he had been present at Willow Creek House,
by the request of Mr. Hercule Poirot, to give the evidence of his own eyes in the matter of the Hôpital Saint-Louis in the autumn of 1898. He was thanked. He stepped down. The coroner looked at the clerk and wrote, at the foot of the deposition, the word "recommended" with a small bracket beside it, indicating that the case was to be forwarded to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Mr. Proctor was called. He set out, in his own lawyer's voice, the provisions of the will made by Sir Edmund Ashworth in the autumn of 1933, which had not been altered since, and which left the estate, on the death of the master, to the Lady Helena, in tail, with remainder to the son Victor, and a small sum, in trust, to the niece Eleanor Vance. He said also that the will contained on the second page, in the master's own hand, an addition of one paragraph, in a slightly different ink, which Mr. Proctor had not, until this morning, been at liberty to read aloud. He asked, with a glance at Poirot, whether he should read it now. Poirot inclined his head.
Mr. Proctor said, "I have been asked by the Belgian to read aloud this paragraph to the inquest, in the presence of the family, in the presence of the niece, and in the presence of the young gentleman from France." He read in a voice a little lower than the rest. "I, Edmund Ashworth, being of sound mind, and being about to set right, while there is time, the long wrong of my house, do hereby direct that the Lady Helena, my daughter by law and my ward by affection, shall, on the occasion of the reading of this will, be told, by my solicitor, of the one thing which I have concealed from her since the day of her mother's death, namely, that her true father by blood is the physician Marcus Thorne. I have not been able to tell her myself, and I have not been able to set her free, and I have not, for 31 years, had the courage to do either. I am now, by the late action of my doctor, who has taken it upon himself to save her by the only means that have been forbidden him, given her the chance to be told by someone who is not myself. I am not free. He has freed her. I thank him for it." Mr. Proctor paused. He said with the smallest tremor in his voice, "I am instructed by the master's will that this paragraph is read aloud, in part, for the daughter Helena, who is in this house at this moment, and who does not yet know the contents." He asked again, with a glance at the steward, whether the Lady Helena could be brought to the drawing-room. James Hartwell, who had been standing by the window all morning, went up the stairs without a word and returned, after a moment, with Helena on his arm. Helena was wearing the green cloak. She was wearing it because, since Wednesday, she had not wished to wear anything else. She sat in the chair by the fire that Mr. Hartwell set for her. She looked at the steward. She looked at the lawyer. She looked at Poirot across the room. She did not look at the corridor. She did not look at the door of the study which had been left, this morning, deliberately open by the coroner's own clerk. Mr. Proctor read the paragraph aloud again, in the same voice. He did not pause this time. When he had read it, Helena did not speak for a long minute. She sat in the chair. She looked at her own hands, folded in her lap. She looked out of the window at the apple trees, which had been shaking in the wind all morning and which were now, in a small lull, quite still. "My father," she said at last, in a voice that did not rise above a whisper, "has been a difficult man. He has been, in addition, a kind man. He has left me the estate, and he has left me in this will the right to be told the truth." She looked at Poirot. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "I should like to thank you. I should like to thank Mr. Proctor. I should like to thank Mr. Hartwell for his long years of work in this house. I should like to thank my cousin Eleanor and her cousin Augustin for their courage in coming all this way to give evidence in a foreign tongue." She paused. "I should not," she said, "like to thank Dr. Thorne. He has given me my life, in the way that a man might give a small child a string of colored beads and call it a jewel. I am grateful for the string, and I am sorry for the jewel, and I am, for the rest of my days, going to call him nothing at all. He has done us all a wrong. He has done me a wrong. He has done the household a wrong. He has done the doctor he once was in another country a wrong. He has done himself a wrong. He has written a letter which no one in this house will read aloud to anyone else. The letter will be put away in a drawer in the morning room, in the cabinet marked with his name, and it will be left there for as long as the cabinet stands. I shall not refuse him the cabinet. I shall not refuse him the morning room. I shall refuse him the company of my son when I have a son, and the company of my friends when I have friends, and the company of my own heart, which he has held in his hand for 19 years. She looked out of the window again. I am not, she said, going to be a small girl. I am going to be a woman. I am going to take the estate. I am going to run the orchard. I am going to read the books of the household and pay the wages and mend the roofs and write to the solicitors and write to the men of business. I am going to sit at the foot of this table in my mother's cloak, and I am going to draw up the accounts in my own hand. I am not going to be carried any more from chair to chair. She looked at Poirot. If you will forgive me, Mr. Poirot, I should like now to go back to my room. I should like to wind the music box. The music box has been stopping in the middle of the tune for 19 years. I should like to hear it play to the end. She stood. Mr. Hartwell offered his arm. She did not take it.
She walked, alone, to the door of the drawing room and out into the corridor and up the stairs on her own feet, and the sound of her slippers on the boards was the sound the household had not heard in 19 years. The room was quiet after she had gone. Mr. Hartwell did not look up. Mr. Proctor did not look up. Lady Beatrice, in her chair by the fire, lifted her grey glove and let it fall to her lap and did not pick it up. Victor stood. He walked over to the window. He looked out at the orchard for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that was not quite like the one he had been using all week, I have lost my father. I have been a poor son. I have been a poor brother. I shall, if you and my sister will let me, mend in the days that remain. He did not turn round. He looked instead at the small object Poirot had set down that morning on the corner of the side table. It was the small brass key on the thin silk ribbon. Poirot had put it there an hour earlier, in front of the steward, in front of the cook, in front of the butler who had been there for 40 years. He had put it there because a key, in the end, is not the thing one wants to be carried away from a house in a greatcoat pocket. A key belongs on a side table, so that the person who owns the house can walk back to the door she has been afraid of and unlock it herself, on her own. Helena went up to her room. The cloak was on her shoulders. She sat in the small chair by the window. She took from her pocket the small brass key that had been left on the side table downstairs, and which Mr. Hartwell had carried in silence up to her on a saucer, before anyone in the drawing-room had noticed that it was missing. She set the key down on the table beside her tea. She did not use it. She picked it up after a moment and walked, with the cloak brushing the boards behind her, back along the corridor to the door at the end. The door she had not opened since she was a child. She put the key in the lock. She turned it. The door opened. The room inside was empty except for the desk, the lamp, the silence, and the small green glass bottle which Mr. Hartwell had set on the desk the night before, beside the master's empty cup, in a small line of black silk. She did not go in. She stood for a long minute on the threshold. The cloak was heavy on her shoulders. She folded it for the first time in her life over her arm. She folded it the way her mother had folded it, in another century, beside another door. She went back to her own room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She wound the music box with the small brass key slowly 3 times. She opened the lid. The tune began in the right key. It went on by the second bar in the right key. It went on by the fourth bar and the 8th and the 16th without stopping. It played for the first time in 19 years to the end.
Below her, on the stairs, Poirot heard it through the floor, and a thin smile came to his face. The smallest in his life. The way a man smiles when he has set a small, frail thing free and has done with it and is grateful. He took up his notebook. He wrote in the margin of the last page the date and time. He wrote beneath it the word, "Done." He put the notebook away. He walked down the stairs. He bowed to the steward at the bottom. He went out to the front steps. A small, dark figure behind the apple tree on the lawn was standing with a small leather bag in his hand. The young man from France was waiting for the afternoon train. Poirot walked past him. He did not speak. He reached the gate. He opened the small wooden gate. He passed through. He walked down the lane in the rain in his dark coat with his small grey case. At the gate he turned once and looked up at the upstairs window of Willow Creek House. The curtain was drawn back a small fraction. A hand, a thin hand, lifted itself against the glass and rested there for a moment, and then was withdrawn. The hand was not holding anything. It was simply a hand, in the window, in the rain, of the woman who had been the most loved girl in the county for 19 years, and who was now, in her own way, for the rest of her life, the small, unhidden master of Willow Creek House. Poirot inclined his head and went on down the lane. The end.